When she first took over as the New York Times public editor, Margaret Sullivan learned the #1 concern of readers was not political bias, factual errors, or even delivery problems. No, the #1 issue was the use of anonymous sources. And while other public editors have addressed the issue, this week Sullivan took it to another level.
I'll never quote you.
It's not that anonymous sources are wrong, quite to the contrary. Who can forget Deep Throat, who helped the Washington Post bring down the Nixon administration?
I wouldn't quote you even as an anonymous source. I mean, you'd be on deep background.
That source, one-time FBI official Mark Felt, eventually outed himself. Of course, a number of news organizations have also been bitten by anonymous sources. Notably, New York Times reporter Judith Miller, who took the bait from the Bush administration about weapons of mass destruction in Iraq.
There's a story in the New York Times this morning. This is, and I want to attribute to the Times. I don't want to talk about, obviously, specific intelligence sources.
Now, though, the paper of record is being taken to the woodshed by its very own public editor. Margaret Sullivan recently launched AnonWatch, which calls out reporters who quote anonymous sources when it's in violation of the Times' own standards. For example, allowing an anonymous Democratic insider to insult New York Governor Andrew Cuomo. AnonWatch is getting high praise from competitors, a shout-out from the Huffington Post and journalist provocateur Glenn Greenwald among them. Then again,
I do not reveal confidential sources.
When it comes to any kind of source, it's a matter of trust, as lamented by legendary Washington Post editor Ben Bradley, played here by Jason Robards.
And I hate trusting anybody.
Couldn't have said it better myself. Well, you never know. You're only as good as your source, as we say. But it's about time, because you look at some of the tortured explanations that the reporters and editors and everybody else comes up with for explaining why they use anonymous sources, and half the time it's just lazy, or you're protecting somebody. And some of these things, you know, like the guy who was calling out Andrew Cuomo, I mean, that was another Democratic guy. I mean, if he's going to say something, we want to know who said it. That's as interesting as what he said about Andrew Cuomo. So, yeah, I mean, and that really was in the violation of the New York Times standards, when you're allowing somebody to take an ad hominem swipe at somebody and you're not saying who they are. So, yeah, this is going to be kind of fun to watch.
It is. I mean, first of all, let me say, I've said this before, Margaret Sullivan is the best public editor the New York Times has ever had, and this is just further proof of that. And when you read her explanation as to what she's up to, she's not on some sort of a crusade against all anonymous sources. What she's saying is they're being overused. There are times when we have to use anonymous sources, but there are so many times that it's completely unnecessary. And I honestly think a lot of it, and it'll be interesting to see whether she picks up on this, I think a lot of it comes from Washington-based reporters who would rather use anonymous sources because it makes them look like one of the cool kids when they do.
I also think it's become something, to your point about lazy, I think we should explain to people that people are saying so-and-so wouldn't go on the record because they were wearing red today and so-and-so doesn't like red. I mean, they're ridiculous reasons. There has to be anonymous. It's not like people's lives are in danger. Deep Throat, that was a serious situation. We don't know who was going down or what was happening there. So you want to keep those anonymous sources for people who really are in jeopardy, either physical or some other kind of way. And they have something important to say, and they're trying to, give that to the public. But this other stuff, this is ridiculous. And we, either get the people to buck up and say it, or we got to figure out better ways of presenting the information. It's the same thing that happened when there was an overuse of undercover video. Same thing.
Yeah, I'm really encouraged by the fact that Margaret Sullivan claims that this is the #1 peeve of New York Times readers. That reflects a very encouraging level of astuteness on the part of those readers. And the bottom line is, behind just about every story, there's an anonymous source originally, or at least many interesting stories. That's how you get stories. People drop a dime to you. And they always have a motive for doing so. Sometimes it's truth, justice, in the American way. That's about 1%. 99% of the time they have their own axe to grind. Okay, you factor that in, you take the information, you go with it, and if you're a decent journalist, you check it out independently of that source. I don't think there's a reason to ever use or ever quote anonymous sources. How about that? I mean, it's easy for me in TV.
It's a lot harder in TV.
Well, if I don't have somebody on camera, I don't have anything I can use. But why not, if you want to get a point across that you're only getting from people who refuse to be identified, get it from multiple people and then report it as fact, or multiple sources say this. You don't need to be quoting, certainly not in a frivolous context like that personal attack on Governor Cuomo, in a column, by the way, written by a journalist whose neutrality on the issue of charter schools, which is what that was about, has been questioned. So it's a bad juju all around.
Yeah, it's not that the New York Times has a bad set of rules around when to use anonymous sources. They actually have a pretty well thought out schema that says you shouldn't use anonymous sources to allow someone to attack someone else, or a variety of contexts, when it's okay, when it's not. It's just that those rules just aren't being followed, and that's the fundamental issue. So if this is what the New York Times, the public editor and the newsroom, the rest of the newsroom, have often had a strained relationship.
Yeah.
No one likes to have an in-house critic telling the world how bad you do certain things. But if this is what it takes to have the newsroom side start enforcing their own rules, I think it's a good thing. It's also going to be interesting to see how long she sticks with it. Yeah. In that if she was going to really stick with this, it could be an everyday column. It could be at least multiple times a week. And is it going to take that kind of repetition to sort of get the point across?
Well, that's the point. Is it going to change the behavior of the newsroom, and more specifically the editors who read the copy and say, no, you got to either go back and get the guy on the record or take this out or find somebody else to make the same point? And that's the question. Will it change the behavior of the editors?
I think it will, because it's going to be repetitive, and then you get to see yourself there in the paper, then that gets to be a little embarrassing.
And if you want the confidence of your readers, you better get with the program. And if you don't want their confidence, what are you doing in the business?
All right. Stay with it.